Hey guys, what's going on? It's Alexander Williamson here with the secret history living in your aquarium. So today we're going to be talking about shrimp, and we're going to be talking about the 5 best shrimp to keep if you're new at shrimp keeping, or if you just don't want a lot of hassle and to do a lot of care. So the criteria that is creating the list of 5 shrimp species we're going to talk about today are: how easy are they to care for? How available for you to see are they? Because you can have easy shrimp to care for, but they're never around. It's no fun. So how present are they? How many babies do they have? Can you grow a colony? Can you breed them for profit? Things like that. And then also, the last thing, and probably the most important, is how much maintenance and how specialized is that maintenance for each species. So, for instance, you could have the volcanic shrimp from Hawaii, and lots of people love them. They're really easy to care for, and they can basically just survive off algae in a closed container jar, but they need very specific salty water and certain pH and, all the right conditions, and not many fish can live with them. So to make a number 1 on this list, it needs to be very versatile, living in a lot of different pH, KH, GH, and TDS. Now, if you're not familiar with these terms and you're new to the hobby, then definitely equate yourself with those terms before going forward in this video. I've got videos on all that, so go ahead and just search for it on this channel or any other for that matter. And we're going to hop in on that list right now, counting down the 5 easiest and best shrimp to keep. A lot of things have changed over the years. They used to be pretty tricky to keep some of these species, and now they're getting easier to keep too. So that's really exciting news for all of us. All right, everybody, at number 5 on our list, we've got the wonderful little bamboo shrimp. I say little, but it's not that little of a shrimp. In fact, it is somewhere between 2.5 and 4 inches full grown, so it is kind of a centerpiece shrimp, and probably requires about 5 to 10 gallons per shrimp you have of these shrimp, because they're also filter feeders. That's what they're doing with their arms here, is they're grabbing little teeny tiny bits of food out of the water and then eating it, which also makes it slightly tricky in that you either need a mature tank with lots of little microorganisms for them to munch on, or you need a tank where you're adding those foods that they want to eat, and you'll have to do a little bit of research about that. Now, as far as being able to reproduce in your tank, they can't. They need salt water. They're a lower order breeder, and that's a bit of a bummer. And it makes it so that even though they're super peaceful and they do seem to clean up your water quality, they're not going to be really cleaning the algae off of surfaces, and they need a little bit of flow because they like to filter feed. And they also are a truly tropical shrimp that needs to be in a temperature as such. Now, number 4 on our list is these guys, the ammonia shrimp. And a lot of people know them. A lot of aquascapers use them famously to eat algae. And they are a great shrimp. They're relatively easy to keep. They can be in temperatures that are even subtropical, down into around 60 degrees and up to around 80, 85 degrees max. But again, lower order breeders, so they're not going to breed in your tank, which could be a plus for some people, but most people want to have shrimp that are reproducing in their tank. Now, another downside is they're going to eat anything but algae if they have a chance. So these ones will eat algae off of surfaces. They are pretty easy to keep in that they've got that wide temperature range, and they've got a pH range where they can live in slightly acidic or slightly alkaline water. And like the bamboo shrimp, you can keep them with live bears that tend to need a little bit harder water, or you can keep them in soft water, which is nice. So there is some versatility there. However, they're kind of mean to other shrimp, and they're prone to jumping out of their tank. In fact, when I say they're kind of mean, sometimes they even cannibalize one another, which is no fun when they don't spawn in the tank for you. But overall, this is a great species, the Carrida multidentata. And Takashi Amano, who was the founder of the aquascaping movement in the modern era, he really did discover this and bring this shrimp to the forefront. And so it's a great standby. They're usually fairly inexpensive. They will clean your tank, and they will do a really good job of eating algae. Pound for pound, they're probably one of the best algae eaters there is in the aquarium hobby, which is great, and what leaves them. I wanted to say a word about Carrida shrimp, because in our hobby, for a long time, it's been kind of thought that Carrida means hard to keep. And as a general rule, that's sort of true. But the real truth of the situation is that it's just hard to keep the fancy versions. So naturally, they live in pretty clear running streams with low TDS and just a little bit of KH and a little bit of GH, which we have fish species that live in those waters too, but in the United States and a lot of parts of the world, it's hard to control your tap water to the point where it doesn't have any swings. And when you look at fancy versions like this little blue stardust down here, or like the other tangerines in here, you might have seen tangerine blue tigers or these orange or super tangerine tigers over the years. These have been some of the first really fancy shrimp in the hobby, right alongside the Neocaridina, which you see a bunch of Neocaridina babies feeding here, and they'll be on the list in a moment. But I just wanted to mention this before we continue, that just because it's a Carrida doesn't mean it's difficult, but the more brightly colored and opaquely colored, so the more bright it is and the more solid the colors are, or the more striking the stripes and things are, generally that means that it's been bred by humans. And as they line breed, a lot of times the shrimp lose some of their ability to tolerate different climates other than those perfectly climate controlled tanks that they were spawned in and the creek that they came out of in the wild. So like these little blue stardusts here and these tangerine tigers, they're not going to be very hardy, just like your blue bolts or your fish bones or galaxies or pintos or wines or king kongs, you name it. There's a whole list of them. However, the Carrida serrata that's wild, this one here, which we've been calling the cheetah shrimp because it's from a different collection point most likely, but we think it's genetically the same as the tangerine tigers are. They're actually pretty robust when humans haven't been line breeding them. So it's not out of the question to keep these or raccoon shrimp or some of the wild color morphs if you can find them. But as a general rule in our hobby and for a lot of people in the US, it's pretty hard to find these wild style Carrida shrimp, and so a lot of people have just assumed that they're hard to keep, even though they may not truly be. So I just wanted to mention that before we move on to our next number on the list. Alright, at number 2, we've got the Neocaridina, which is the cherry shrimp, famously known. Now, these probably are the most diverse shrimp there are out there as far as color morphs in the hobby, and they're probably the most hardy of the popular shrimp species. Now, the white ones or snowball ones are the Palmata Neocaridina species, whereas you get other colors like orange and blue and green and brown and black and striped and clear spots and things, and those are going to be the Neocaridina davidi or zengagensis as they're sometimes called. They all hybridize and they've all been mixed, and early on in the hobby they were kind of difficult to keep because they were from softer water with a little bit of KH, a little bit of GH, and cooler temperatures. However, I recommend now if you get them, that you get them from a local hobbyist if possible, or from somewhere where they keep water parameters similar to yours, because they still survive in a wide range of water parameters, and they've been bred to be hardy over the more recent generations, but they are still a little sensitive to that. So you need to be aware that they're going to be in that 6.5 pH to maybe 8.0 pH, TDS 100 to 400. So they're very versatile in color and in how hardy they are. And temperature-wise, they can even live year-round in a tub or in a pond, and there are many reports of people successfully keeping them even through seasons with ice. So they're really peaceful. They're great with other fish and other critters in the aquarium. Their babies can get eaten, so do be aware of that. But they're pretty good at, showing up and being there, being part of the show in your aquarium, and they do eat algae pretty well, so they're a great addition. Guys, I want to get to number 1 on the list, and that is Carrida Shrimp, and they are a really cool shrimp. And here we have Malawa shrimp. That is their common name. They're from the island of Sulawesi, and they kind of glow, which is neat. They kind of have this jewel tone to them. Some of them have yellows on them. Some of them are clear. Some of them have kind of browns or reds or grays. And they kind of change color with the mood they're in, if they're spawning, if they're eating, if they're nervous. And the water quality, but they can survive in a really wide array of tanks. In fact, I put them in most of my tanks. They can survive all the way from 6.0 pH or so, all the way up to around 8.2 pH. And that's because on the island of Sulawesi, they are in all sorts of different waters. As they're in streams and creeks, they actually, with the flash flood season, the water is pretty much a TDS 0 with a pH of 7, which is neutral, when it is the rainy and wet season. And that means that they're going to be able to handle very soft water without much calcium added. In fact, like a KH and GH of only 2 or 3 sometimes will sustain them just fine. And they can also tolerate the swings like they have during the dry season when they're in a tank like this, where I actually have guppies in here. And in this tank, there's tetras, there's guppies, and this tank's around a 7.5 pH with the TDS up around 300. So they're not shy, they're very outgoing, and one downside is they don't come in a ton of color morphs. Another downside is that there are some very rare shrimp in the hobby, and this happens to not be a Malawa. This is a nebula shrimp, a golden nebula shrimp. And they're very similar, except the golden nebulas have a sparkle to them, and these little kind of golden plaques or color blotches next to their armor, and the kind of golden eyes generally, whereas the Malawa don't. So just a little note on species details, but these are a super hardy shrimp, and they'll always be out front and center in your tanks. They'll be out up even with where the fish are active, and they'll be eating the algae. Now, one more thing I want to mention is that if we come down here, this tank has a TDS of around 100, and it is actually really acidic in the sense that it's got around a 6.0 pH. Yet, these shrimp are still thriving. They have a lot of babies each time they have babies. And over time, I've been able to start selecting color morphs from them. And so we're able to start seeing some of the reds, some of the blues, and actually separating them out. Like here's a nice blue Malawa that's taken me about 6 years of selective breeding, but I've made sure that they're still just as tough living in hard and soft water. So these blue Malawas are starting to have more color, which is a big plus, because for a long time, that's why nobody liked these shrimp, was because they're usually kind of like that one, just kind of clear. But they do have a ton of babies, which is another nice thing. That little blue one back there, she's got lots of babies in her, and they come out fully formed. They can have the babies in fresh water, so they've got the best of the Neocaridina traits and some. They can survive in very cool water, down in the 40 and 50 degree mark, as long as they're not brought there suddenly, as long as they're eased into that. And they can even survive in freezes. When the water freezes over, they'll survive down in the substrate, just like Neocaridina can sometimes. Now, I suspect the more that these are tinkered with and the more that people breed color morphs of them, the harder they will be to keep in diverse conditions. But for now, Malawa Caridina, or Malawa, however you want to say it, from the island of Sulawesi, Caridina pardentata or paraperdentata are really awesome shrimp, and they are my #1 easiest shrimp to keep. You'll have lots of babies, you'll be able to sell them, they'll clean, and they'll hang out right in the open. So they're a big #1, and I want to thank you for joining me and counting down the top 5 best and easiest shrimp to keep in the hobby. If you enjoyed this, I'd love it if you hit that little thumbs up to let other folks know to check this out. And if you want to see more or check out more of my playlists and stuff, go ahead and subscribe and click the little alert bell so you'll know when new content's out. Thank you so much, and you guys have a wonderful day and a wonderful time keeping your shrimpy little pets and friends. I'll talk to you next time on The Secret History, Living in Your Aquarium. Bye.